The United States Constitution. The Constitution was ratified in 1789, 6 years after the end of the Revolutionary War. That is what they were fighting for was decided upon after they finished fighting over it. It is often supposed that the Constitution exists to protect our rights, though the falsehood of this is evidenced by the behavior of the U.S. federal government following 1789, but also by the fact that the word right doesn't appear in the Constitution. This omission was so glaring that the Bill of Rights had to be added 2 years later in December 1791. This suggests that the men creating the Constitution were not concerned with your rights, but with creating an instrument of power, and I contend an instrument of limitless power whenever they wanted to use it that way. Let me take a few parts of the Constitution. Here is the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Very fair words. They sound very nice. But have you ever taken the time to read them carefully to find out what they mean? We, the people of the United States. By the use of this phrase, there is a clear inference that the people of the United States, either directly or through their representatives, either wrote or approved of this document. That is not true. That phrase is essentially fraudulent. This instrument was never examined by the people of the United States to find out if they care to approve it. None of them have explicitly approved of it of their own free act and deed, and they have never been asked to and have never bound themselves voluntarily under the provisions in it. The people who drew up it had no legal right to oppose it upon them as law, yet it says, "We the people of the United States." Let's go on. In order to form a more perfect union, I'm not at all certain that I would favor that. The idea of a perfect union can be traced to Plato's Republic, which was his version of a perfect society where everyone had a place in society and was to be under a captain at all times and give obedience to that captain at work or at play. You must obey the state, and the state as Plato saw it was the perfect union under a philosopher king. In contrast, Zeno believed the object was not to provide a perfect society, but to create perfect individuals. Zeno, founder of the Stoic school, claimed that if you create a perfect society with imperfect people, then you would have to take these imperfect men and put them in a perfect society by force. How much better would it be to have the emphasis be on perfect individuals and let each person provide whatever society he pleased? Let's continue. Establish justice. Now, what does that mean? Establish means to found, to do something for the first time. This presupposes that there was no justice prior to the Constitution. Apparently, the writers of this instrument were going to establish justice for the first time for us. Well, how kind of them. Justice is subjective. Is justice to mean fair dealing, quid pro quo, and mutually agreed upon exchange? Or is it to mean retroactive vengeance over all that is claimed to be unjust? Because justice is not defined, this leaves the door open to experimentation and interpretation. And this is partly why statism is so chaotic, because law is not regulated by a matrix of explicit arrangements, each of which can be opted out of, but is just written down and interpreted and then applied to all in an area. And this is bad enough in clear contracts. The vagueness of the Constitution only amplifies the problem of the fiat nature of it. Ensure domestic tranquility. Now, what does that mean? Well, ensure is obvious. It means to guarantee, to make certain. Tranquility is also obvious. We have pills for that. You can have tranquility through meditation and avoiding conflict. But what does domestic mean? Well, two possible interpretations. One, domestic as opposed to foreign, in the sense of being within the borders of the United States as opposed to within the borders of the United Kingdom. Another interpretation would be domestic in the sense of inside somebody's home. and both interpretations have been accepted. The U.S. federal government, by this statement, has the power to interpose in your home to ensure that you are tranquil. Well, what if you don't want to be tranquil? Well, in fact, why is tranquility something to be strived for at all? I wouldn't want to be tranquil if the world around me was going to hell. But the state can cite this passage and ensure domestic tranquility whether you like it or not. This is not a passage I, nor do I suspect many others, would have approved of if they looked at it closely. Provide for the common defense. Well, what does that mean? Provide means to pay for. So the federal government is to pay for the common defense. Well, how generous of them. Well, what is common defense? Well, I suppose it is the defense against any common danger. Now, what are the common dangers? Well, there could be dangers of invaders from abroad, bank robbers, rapists, murderers, arsonists, thieves, etc., rats. Though many other types of dangers exist in the world. Education, money, opportunity, bad health, bad breath, termites. Almost anything that exists could be viewed as a common danger. Does this authorize the state to intervene in these areas? Indeed it does. And indeed the government has. Can you think of something that doesn't represent a common danger? Drinking too much water could drown you. Taking too many aspirins could kill you. Eating too much meat could give you a heart attack. There's nothing we are not in danger from. This gives the state wide open doors to provide against any danger as long as we experience on a common ground. Promote the general welfare. Promote. Now that's a very active word. You're not just allowing something, you pick it up where it is and you promote it. General welfare. Now what does that mean? Or more properly, what doesn't it mean? Is there anything that is excluded? It could be anything. And it is to be promoted actively. To secure the blessings of liberty and to ourselves and our posterity. Whatever is meant by the blessings of liberty, we the people are not only binding ourselves but also our posterity to our particular interpretation. Is it proper to bind our children into an arrangement which as adults they will have no opportunity to consider? Would you counsel that I run up a debt and ask my children to pay it? This is essentially what is being done, is it not? The current state is running up a debt so fast that we will not live long enough to pay it off. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Very solemn words. We the people do ordain and establish this Constitution. And that is fraud. We the people have no power to do such a thing. We have never done it. The people who put this together had no such right to do this over their contemporaries, let alone over you. There is no reason we have to do this. This is merely a statement of some men who are now dead, who had no power to speak in the name of their contemporaries and never asked for such power, and it has been merely put over. Now, let me read from Article 1, Section 8 of this Constitution, which we are told has limited powers. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Okay, so the Congress shall have the power to do two things. One, to lay, and two, to collect. To lay in this sense means to levy. That is, these men, called state, have the power to decide how much money you have that they want. And then they have the power to collect whatever it is that you have that they want. Where's the limit? Well, there isn't one. They can do this insofar as taxes, duty, imposts, and excises. But there is a modifier stating that these taxes, duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. But what does that mean? Well, it simply means that if you collect a 10% income tax in Virginia, you must also collect a 10% income tax in Massachusetts. But at what level? 10%, 40%, 80%, 100%? 150%? It doesn't matter as long as it is uniform. And what is to be taxed? Well, there is no limit at all. Congress has the power to lay taxes. And for what purposes? To pay the debts. What debts? It doesn't say. It could be any debts. If the Congress wants a brothel and runs up a debt, or wants the best medical services on the planet, they can run up debts for that and tax you for it. And provide for the common defense, whatever that may mean. And the general welfare, whatever that may mean. Where is the limitation? There is none. That is exactly what it says and exactly what it means, and the state has behaved very much in accordance with the Constitution. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Congress has the power to borrow money on your credit. They don't borrow money against their own personal credit. They borrow against the expectation that they can tax you without any limit whatever they think you're good for and what your posterity are good for, they can borrow against to pay off their debt. There is no limit. To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states of the Union, not states in the political science term, and with the Indian tribes. What does that mean? Well, it means that Congress can regulate trade that occurs, 1, between this and foreign states, and 2, between the domestic states, parenthetical states of the Union. How far does this go? Well, a test for this has already shown us. If a man raises chickens on his farm and also raises grain on his farm by means of which he feeds his own chickens, that man is affecting interstate commerce and can be regulated by Congress. Why is this? Because if the man did not feed his own chickens with his own grain, he would have to go off his farm and buy chicken, He would have to go off his farm and buy some grain. Right? And conceivably, the grain he produced could go across state lines, or the chicken he produced could go across state lines. And the fact that he chooses not to sell his grain impacts interstate commerce negatively. Thus, Congress has the power to regulate this man. Another example is the case where a judge determined that window washing was a matter of interstate commerce, because a window washer can look into a window, see a telephone which crosses state lines, and is thus impacting interstate commerce and can be regulated by Congress. Well, that just opens it up now, doesn't it? Practically speaking, Congress has the power to regulate all commerce. Imagine if a delegation from a foreign country came to you and determined that you would make an excellent dictator and wish to appoint you as such. They would offer you unlimited power to tax, right, presuming the tax rates were uniform, and borrow against the credit of the nation to provide for whatever you deem to be the general welfare and the common defense as defined by you. Which is to say, you can tax whatever you want for whatever you want. As a budding dictator, what else could you ask for? But these are precisely the powers given to Congress and used by Congress, and these powers came from the Constitution, purportedly an instrument of limited powers. Where's the limitation? There is none. The U.S. Constitution is an instrument of limitless power. Let's go a bit further down. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. Note that nations is plural. This means that Congress has the power to define as piracy a shipload of vegetables crossing from the Bahamas to Miami and order something be done about it. Suppose you picked up the Soviet Constitution. I don't know if there was one, so if not, just go along with it. Suppose you picked up the Soviet Constitution and it said, "The Supreme Soviet has the power to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations." Would that give you the impression that they intended to operate beyond their continental limits? And is this not precisely what the United States federal government has done? Perhaps this explains much of the anti-American sentiment abroad. Now, you are probably not militant and don't wish ill upon anyone. You wish to live a peaceful, productive life and be a good neighbor, but when you travel abroad, or abroad travels to you, can you not see a glint in their eye? We know all about you Americans. You are two-faced. Now, you aren't two-faced, but you see, they have experienced the Constitution unsheathed, where you, as the tax cattle, are kept fat, productive, and protected inside the pen, with a portion of the product of your labor used to fund the wars abroad. Let's go further down. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or office thereof. Now that particular clause is called the grab bag clause in Washington, D.C., and attorneys know that whenever they lack precedent or authority anywhere else in the Constitution, they can always cite that. But this argument here is all ad hoc and specific to the United States Constitution, so let me say this. All language has to be interpreted and will have some vagaries. This includes private contracts between two people. This is why private contracts can only be functional as a reminder of something explicitly agreed upon between two individuals. Now, it is impossible for both parties to be in perfect harmony of understanding as to the agreement, and this disharmony will eventually manifest in some sort of conflict. Perhaps the contract can be referenced, but if the conflict persists, then they will have to consult a mediator. If the conflict still persists, then what? Well, then both parties must break off the agreement. A state constitution is like a contract, except that it is involuntary. So even if it were written to clearly limit the powers of the state, which the U.S. Constitution is not, if individuals cannot break off, which they can't in the U.S., then they are stuck with a contract that cannot be exited. And the result is an artificially high level of conflict because the contract can't simply be exited as occurs in normal, sane human interaction. We are artificially stuck in this contract, and this leads to a statist level of conflict. The freedom to leave regulates behavior. State institutions, and state constitutions, state institutions as well, but in this case, state constitutions prevent leaving, and hence lack the primary means of regulation on a free market, which is freedom of association.